Hola. Well, hello, I'm Ruiz Valencia. We are about to present this panel, which is called Subjectivity, Things for Subjetivar. So we have three panelists. Um, okay, we are going to start with the panel. With our three panelists, I'm going to introduce them. I have Gonzalo Biffarella. He was born in 1961. Like, wow. He was born in the National University of Córdoba, Argentina, at Argentina. He studied in Buenos Aires. He has received many distinctions in the national environment. His work has been presented in 30 countries, composing for the main institutes of electroacoustics in France, in the W3D in Cologne, in Germany. He studied acoustic art by in Klaus Schellinger in the SSC of the University of Padova, Italy, and the Center Recoleta in Buenos Aires, Center Reina Sofia, among others. So his compositions have been recognized in many discographic labels, and the collection panorama of Argentinian music, and also the field of the mirrors devoted to electroacoustic published in 2010 to present his work in electronic music in France and in Nera in secret music in Spain. Gonzalo is also a promoter, a big promoter of experimental music and label Diaspora Mobile, which is a space to record and collaborate with different musicians with emphasis on free improvisation. Next to him is Alain Derbez. He is a poet, essayist, narrator, musician. He studied history at UNAM, National University of Mexico. He has been a collaborator and a director in important publications like Letras Libres, La Jornada, also the journal Cuadernos de Jazz in Spain, and he is in charge of steering on radio education, radio, the National University of Mexico. Among his books, we found, among others, Jazz in Mexico, Data for this History, or Jazz According to Don Juan, an anthology about blues and jazz in like Hispano-American literature. Everyone hears or everyone listens in the silence, and a chronicle of the history of indigenous radio in Mexico. He's also translator of the book of Agile Headless, uh, Falling in the Wrong Key. He also has some these this author of many songs, and many of his songs have been interpreted or sung by Eugenio León, Daniel Libertad, Gerardo Batis, Real de 14, La Fontaine, among others. And finally, okay, well, so far, and I would like to give the floor to Alain.
Gracias. Muy bien.
Well, hello. I know how to write, but I don't have a good letter. I won awards for calligraphy. Um, my professor, I will call this professor Dolores. The place will see a new light when I was writing with my beautiful child. And I was writing like things that were not particularly poetic. Afterwards, my calligraphy became not so good. My lines were not uh, were not so beautiful anymore. Like the nowadays, my letter was now becoming fussy, like a sheep that's starting to enter a form, like not knowing where to go and just trying to survive in the sea. So I was just trying to play some tunes. However, I was trying to read the book of Magdalena Bar. I finally started to check Border Golden. I could have recited the Catecism or the Tanim of the Torah. I all of a sudden started reading Malatesta, Kropotkin, Malatesta, Goldman, the old guys that were saying hi and wanted to and were wondering like what happened to you. And I was like, oh, my mom pampered me, and your mom pampered you, which is what I used to write in calligraphy when I was famous for my good calligraphy. So these four words that created a peculiar rhyme remained in the back of my mind. So I write. I know how to write. I'm a man of letters. I manage the vowels. A, U. I know that a letter A on a within a circle is anarchy, although I don't know where or why.
Esgrime la palabra caos para descalificarla.
Qualify or to question. Yeah, it's like somehow order, but at the same time, it can be interpreted because it's not exactly a recipe. A is the first letter of anarchy, but at the same time, the second letter of chaos, and the note that goes after soul in the tuning. I play the sax, so I asked my guitar player colleague how to tune. Then the Revolution of October was in November. Uh, so we go along together. What those who ride with Cyrillic and I myself, we can go together and sound together. Babel is always in concert just because we are listening, because we listen to one another. I listen to you and you listen to me. Silence says, time, basis, and the contingency. Reasons that give life, lightning for the territories of the night, fires that are possible, fires and water and air and soil, improvisation. I can read Esperanto, but I can speak in Spanish. This is improvisation, an infinite sea that keeps us, that grants us, that calms, that cures, that frees, that the freedom that we are navigating. I write, and now I am writing an epigraph that needs to cover like an umbrella that needs to tell me to subjectify. I write three epigraphs that are three. Uh, Me lanzo plenamente a la política. ¿Por qué dejaste el jazz? Porque me aseguraron que no sabía cómo componer, cómo improvisar y qué haces. Pues entré a la política. Why did you leave jazz? Because they told me that I didn't know how to interpret, how to improvise, so I started in politics. So I write myself, I rewrite myself, I listen to myself. I am us. I listen to us. I listen to me. I listen to us. I am not. I am not. You are not. I am what you are, and you are what I am. But we are silent, like the silence where everything can be listened. Writing, laying the instrument, and to improvise in the face of a new concoction to create a new bridge over troubled water. So, what is the sky of the birds that bring us about this jazz? Jazz is the surprise, the voices on the wind, the wings of air where we are flying all around. So I write this. This is what I am. But I know that the problem of autobiography and this mania of talking of oneself is that I become so full of myself, so full of the others. So this is a collective autobiography, the sound of others, the others that sound in my voice. I improvise, I speak, I have a dialogue. So I create. These are the characteristics of narrative, of improvisation. You made a poetic. That's what answered J.M. Alvarez. One night, J. Alvarez was asked how to improvise, and he took the instrument and said, "This is how it is." Improvisation creates a framework of analysis, of performative analysis, the strategies of transformation, an original transformation of ourselves. Improvising. Below uncertainty, there is an incorporation of the creation. Improvising is, like the dictionary reads, is doing something out of the blue without preparation. Come on, that's nonsense. Like the flute that was played by the donkey. Now, aware of my words, aware of what my words are capable of, I deny that. I'm aware of the reach of my language, of my words. Let's listen to jazz from the perspective of cultural institutions. Let's bring down the institutions because jazz can examine the comprehension of adjustment between practice and creation, the word and the language. So it goes around institutions. It goes around bringing about political life, public life. There is a historic power of jazz, our jazz, and it related to our current debates of the political function of music, but its historical power is always in the different frameworks of interpretation where it built its own representation. The aim of or lack of aim of jazz is to find ourselves, reveal ourselves, to understand what is moving us as individuals, as social individuals. So what's the differentiation between culture, the big art, or just creation? So the statements of the philosopher, of the German philosopher that were against jazz were phrases just for saying. And there's another poem before defining, just improvising. Let's check jazz. Let's listen to jazz, but let's understand the rationale behind it. Let's forget a little bit about the paradigm and go back to these naked steps. So I try to be a subject. I try to share. I'm not here to just share. Please don't allow me just to speak. I take a license through jazz. So I lose my sound. I write something. I read it with my paragraphs, with my poems, make it economical, make it ephemeral according to the situation. And someone on the other side is asking me if I'm making jazz, if it's the like a father or a creator of new languages, new ways of signifying. And I answer, I take my instrument, readily available to share, and I document what is happening, and I represent myself. I am real. I create, I did create. I quote Debord and its Society of Spectacle. Tradition, innovation can only be done through the victory of innovation. A common language needs to be refound, but on the praxis that brings together the direct activity and its language. It's having the community of dialogue and the play that is about to be represented at a play, at an artistic play. And I close, and I never close at the same time a speech. It's an irreverence. It's a fight against institution. It's jazz. But no, jazz can also be understood as contemporary recounts that destabilize notions. Jazz as an effort to articulate process through which communities fight to have access to the representation, and we write half of it, and the other half corresponds to those who are reading, for those who are listening. So I read, I listen, I am listened, I am created. It's a situation, or that's what the situationist would say. It's a creation, a deliberate situation, a deliberate creation as an organization, a play of happenings. So I play a conference. It's always like a process. It's unexpected and contingent, a creation, but at the same time a creation uh, with bad calligraphy. So this is it. It's a little bit what touches me, what touches you. It's a good. It's somehow like a good touch, similar to a sonnet I once wrote. Sometimes jazz.
El festín, fight and devilish solo duos, telling on saxophone the scars they count, qui raconte ses cicatrices au saxophone, que cuenta el saxofón sus cicatrices. Me han pedido que escriba un papel sobre la improvisación. Me han pedido que improvise un papel sobre la escritura. Me han pedido un papel
Scripture, about an improvisation of scripture. They asked me a paper, and from subjectivity, I gave it a name, a contagion, an epigraph of falling in the wrong key, a dissonance of a J. Hebler. Dissonance can work by itself as a model of critical practice. And another epigraph that yesterday emerged from my dreams. It knows how to sound. Maybe it sounds like it knows. And now it's apprehending, it's learning, but also apprehending the silence to be listened and learn to listen. And a final poem that in horrible moments such as the times that are going on. Do we know how many children are dying in Palestine right now? Should we turn the page? Nobody is listening how I listen. Someone is surprised. I am surprised, but I'm all ears. So what happens? I question. I listen to the question. I try to answer. Now we're two. Uh, incomprehensible. I reached this music, that river where it actually Heracles is is just having a swim. Well, I already said thank you uh, yesterday, and it's really hard to speak with the interventions of Ajay, Wade, and Master Alain Derbez. But I'm just going right into the topic of subjectify. Behind it, we have a psychologist, a philosopher that are giving us this subject that is wide. But in order to go to get close to that place and to reach improvisation, I will start with that, but not specifically about music, or maybe a little bit. The first idea that I want to share with all of you, and when I share an idea, it's not my idea, it's a shared idea, an idea already shared by many. It's an idea concocted and shared by different people, and it's that all of our acts are generated and they have consequences in a geopolitical space, something like that. I said yesterday, but for me, it's like a fundamental starting point. If we lose sight of this, um, many academic spaces or scholarly spaces lose sight of this and they talk about techniques and a lot of things, but not on how close we are to our own environment. That's why I say these ideas cannot be away from the field of action, of artistic action, and particularly contemporary artistic action. They are focused on realities, social, economical, aesthetic realities that condition life in every moment that we are supposed to inhabit. I think that's the first statement. The second idea that I keep sharing and sharing every time is when I can synthesize with just understanding art as a metaphor of the possibility of change. I will go back to that in a moment. It's a possibility. We can take it or not. Always, throughout many years, I heard that art could not change reality, that it could reflect on reality, maybe denounce reality, maybe create inhabitable spaces, virtual spaces where we can inhabit. I think, and I always, let's always keep in mind that it's not I am thinking, is that I am thinking along with many other people who are also thinking that each of the actions of thoughts that we bring into practice, they have actions on the minds of those who are living them. And that is the door for that possibility of change. And I can say that in order to provide that possibility of moving away from what is happening, the access of investigation need to be developed with the responsibility of not just being repetitions of pre existing models. And I think this is important. This is not like going to the point of novelty for novelty or just oblivion of all of our background. I'm not saying this whatsoever, but the model we're looking for is not a model that we're always going to find, but at least we have the intention of looking for this model. It's responsibility of those who research and produce in this area, being aware of the socio-political space from where we are taking action and knowing and interacting with technologies that are at the reach of our hand. This idea of co-construction along with technology, whichever technology, prepares us to give back to the collective we are part of, to give back to the corpus of our collective. And I go back to the first point. I, from the geopolitical space I belong, I am part. I come from a place where education was defended Franco Pellini, who is a friend and a colleague, also from there for Argentine. We fought for free school access. So both professors and students, we are scholars. We receive scholarships. So since we receive scholarship, it's an obligation to think how can we give back to our collective? How can we give back this corpus of knowledge? And the simple repetition of a model in a more egotistical way, absolutely political, although many artists say that it's not, that their work is not political. Let me tell you, it is political. So we feel the obligation of giving back to our space. And more specifically about subjectifying, Benjamin is there. He's throwing that words at us. He, he, he placed us at there, which is actually not placing us there. It's like opening a door. Subjectifying is this attribution of personal qualities to a phenomenon, an object, an experience, to just to be very quick in a bad explanation. But subjectifying is creating meanings, attributing meanings from the perspective of a subject that is observing a reality. So this personalized appreciation adds to the dimension, to the analysis of a situation, and it also helps to build collective and individual collectivities, also the interpretation of meanings of reality. I think that I am opening the door to start an improv session, or that's how I feel, because when we were talking about subjectifying, and the first time I spoke with Ricardo and Benjamin in the preparatory meetings. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about subjectify, and I was like, how could I possibly talk about that? And it was very clear for me, a philosopher. There are many presentations of 50 quotes and all. I don't really love to quote. I'm somehow limited on that regard, but I remember a quote from a philosopher, a French philosopher that worked a lot in Latin America, particularly in Brazil, Felix Guattari, and he talked to us about identity, and subjectivity is formed by a multiplicity of elements. It cannot be reduced to one single physical identity. And he proposes a conception of subjectivity as a fluid or a fluent process that is constantly changing. It's like I feel like we're about to play a session flowing and in constant change. I feel very close to the base of free intro. And it shows that subjectivity is a collective uh, element. And Ricardo talked a lot about it. On that regard, subjectivity in Guattari is understood as a process of happening where individuals are constantly in a situation of creation and reinvention. I would say, wait, we are basically playing Wade. On that point, we are basically improvising music. We are feeling very comfortable. And he made me think about someone who was barreling, and it's the other idea, which is another beautiful metaphor. Just as I said, that art is this metaphor of the possibility of change, the possibility is the keyword, which is the rhizoma of the left. It's a metaphor that proposes a non-hierarchical structure of thinking where elements can are brought together as a network instead of following a vertical or a linear uh, situation. That's what Wade was saying. A moment when we start playing or we start talking, and nobody is doing anything particularly fantastic. It's just that we are interacting. There's no doubt of it, and that is fantastic in itself. We were talking about subjectivity or subjectivity from the interaction with the world. And obviously, we need to wonder, yeah, with what world we are interacting. What's the world that is still being shared from many places, religious, political, academic, artistic? We'll go back to that point. We are right now in somehow of a panel. And I will go back to that because we keep perpetuating certain forms that preserve that way of connection. We are here like a preacher or a politician giving a truth. And then there are you over there listening to us. By the way, thanks for coming. Bring some money and you can live there outside. Uh, so that world, like we were wondering what happened, and over the past hundred of years, like what happened with the world? I see someone special that I want to quote, but over the past 100 years, there were men who were improvisers to a certain extent. Erwin Schrödinger and Edward Heisenberg, with the principle of uncertainty, that world that I say from the highest point, stable, foreseeable world. And part of the problem of scholarly, and I'm not saying critical thinking is not valuable. The problem is when it transforms into institutions, into frozen institutions, something that was very deeply studied by Foucault, that the power makes us think that there's a normalcy. And any idea will be valid. The problem is that when those ideas are institutionalized and they transform into a frozen element that are supposed to be the only way. So these guys, Schrödinger and Heisenberg, they were telling us that the world where everything was already defined, precise, predefined, now has become uncertain. We don't really know where are the particles, where are electrons, particles are crossing through borders that we thought were not able to be crossed. So we are teaching, we are learning, we are understanding, and as academic institutions, we are learning more about certainty, uncertainty. And I fortunately I'm lucky enough to share my life with an astronomer, Victoria Alonso. She gave us an amazing conference in the Institute of Astronomy at UNAM. She showed the 160 galaxies that were discovered that were not able to be seen because they were behind the the universe that we know. So she made me notice some years ago. I am like an amateur astronomer, like the worst astronomer ever, but I'm like an amateur astronomer, and our imagination of astronomy has changed completely in 100 years because we thought that we were on a single place and the rest was just something like a nothingness. And then two guys appeared. Well, actually, more than two guys because there were more influences and networks of influences. And these guys were Aaron Hubble and Georges Lemaitre. And today we know this law, Hubble Lemaitre. And they say, you know what? There's a lot of galaxies around us, not just our galaxy. And one of the things they did was to prove the expansion of the universe, something that totally changed our view of the universe. And this is known as the law of Hubble-Lemaitre. And they say that the universe is not static; it's constantly expanding. And that idea challenged the perception of a static universe. And now that's why we have the current model. Yeah, a model. The best model that was created, which is the Big Bang Theory, but maybe in some years that won't be the model. Who knows? maybe a week in Beaky talking with another astronomers, like they start downloading the James Webb images, and maybe they start talking, and maybe they check, hey, the distance and the times that we thought were correct. Maybe the Big Bang theory might change because, and maybe other people would say, oh, it's a disaster, it's horrible, the science is trembling, and real scientists would say, we are super happy. We were looking forward to constantly improve the models, the models through which we understand the world. So that's how we get close. So I don't know how much time I have left. I'm okay. Okay, good. Um, so I'm still in the astronomy realm. It's a beautiful thing. I find astronomers, amateur astronomers, and I was there to listen to her. And there was a colleague, Horacio Tignanelli. He makes like a performance to kids. And one of the things, which is something interesting, one of the world we reference guys who were studying physics at school, they were explaining to them that matter has three states: solid, liquid, gas. And he said, hey, did you check the sky at night? Like all that light that built astronomy throughout centuries, all that light is light that comes from plasma, a fourth state of the matter. But schools keep talking about three states of matter. And this is the time it takes new technologies for new technologies to insert themselves in the discourse of the daily of our daily days. What kind of world we're interacting with what kind of world we are creating new ideas, not just what other musician, but what other things around us. How can we build a collective vision that's non-vertical, that could generate a subjectivity that will include that which is diverse, what is an otherness, the multiplicity. And I think this is fundamental. They were just talking about everything that was left behind or left out in the world of impro, the traditional world of impro. I think that everything that's out of the vertical power, the patriarchal powers, all that should be something that us as musicians and our attention should be open to. And something was stated, and in the first conference it was mentioned, the limit, the borders, to be aware and interacting with the world state the possibility of widening the limits. Limits are not just something that we need to manage from the inside. I believe that we need to permanently measuring, even if we are wrong, even if it's not the big work, it's just testing the limits, and the toughest limits are the ones we have inside ourselves, that I or that self that we have created, that way of thinking that we have created throughout all of our life, and that has an impact on the rest of our thoughts. When we were talking about reaching a void to have some silence, well, maybe this has something to do with that. This interaction has something that yesterday I mentioned, which is the interaction with the environment, the interaction with that which is diverse. We usually work with what is easy or familiar to us, and then it appears the necessity of dialogue. And we have silence that is present in the title of this colloquium. Wade sent me a document about silence. We will have to read it because it talks about the different functions of silence. Silence as articulation, silence as a closure, silence as many things. It's the silence that we play Just as you play sound, you generate silence, and it's also a way of giving the other the occasion of of expressing himself, to not be speaking like in a monologue. There's no dialogue if we don't give the possibility to the other to speak. So that silence is opening a possibility, like saying to the other person through silence, I am giving you the possibility of speaking or stating yourself. And that silence leaves us or gives us the possibility of reflecting. It could be spontaneously, or it could take a little time, and then we can make the decision of taking action again, or if we should remain in silence. I believe this is quite relevant. Dialogue cannot exist without this perspective of hearing, without listening. And that's the basis of improv. Also, by listening to Wade, is this fundamental premise of basing a session of free improv. If we play all the time, it's going to be really hard to have a dialogue. And I think dialogue is one of the debts. It's something I said yesterday. Dialogue is one of the cultural debts that we have right now, being able to remain silent to listen to the other. And this idea of what I mentioned about the model, this I am trying to wrap up, this repeated model that is conditioning us. It's not a model that conditions musicians. It's a conditioning for all the people when we enter into a concert, to an improv session. Normally, we keep respecting, and I say, and I Franco knows it very well because we try to make experiences where we don't want to respect uh, uh, the structure. No, we tell people, hey, keep moving. We don't want to be in the front of you. And then we make reflection, we make analysis, like how can we make a more active listening, because the audience can enter and sit down, especially if it's a place the where the chairs are in the shade. That's like being on a club. We're in a club of security. They enter and it's like, well, we are safe. We're not on the light. And sometimes the public, what it happens among them. This morning, that bell that was sounding while Wade was speaking, and we were like trying to incorporate that bell sounds into the speech. So there's a lot of limitations. And here you enter, and it doesn't matter if you play right or wrong, but you just play as stating a truth. It will be amazing to interact or to find another way of interaction in the way we are sitting in a space like this. It will be a way of stating a network, a rhizomatic metaphor. But by the way, I love being here. I'm not saying that I don't love being here. I think I just want to say that it's one of the points that we could challenge and share. Thanks a lot to both of you. I want to go back to this last point, which is something that we were thinking, maybe more than one person. And maybe that was the request. Like, at least let's try to get rid of the table, you know? Let's try to. Uh, I mean, it wasn't completely successful because we are here on the top of the panel, but I think it would be interesting to on that process of subjectifying, to think who is speaking, from where, to whom. Those questionings that came to my mind while I was listening to you, like uh, like bringing together the strings of the conversation, not just as a quick Q&A session, like maybe having now or taking advantage that we have the possibility of time, maybe to elaborate a little more. And it's not just what is said, but how it is said. It's not just like what are the super important ideas that are being shared by important people. It's more like how it is done. That is also important, especially if we're talking about impro and how, considering that we're talking about impro, we have this idea of releasing certain ways that were, I mean, releasing in terms of letting go paradigms that are no longer working, and how can that be adapted to different areas in life. So I just wanted to open the conversation with the people on the chairs, uh, with the audience after the presentations of the panel. I need a little bit of help because, well, all of us, but when you were talking, or while you were talking, I had in my head a series of images that I don't know, the first or the last one of opening opening the cage and having a bird that is not coming out of the cage even though the cage is open. This related to the idea that you are like providing a freedom by listening, and afterwards the idea of something like gender is performative, life per se is somehow performative too. So when we are stating collective identity, because identity is also performative, how do we manage the performativity that somehow defines a collective identity? And that leads me, among other things, to the form, uh, considering the American Football Cup, this this necessity of being identified with an external team. I think that in this case, in American Soccer Cup, like you are somehow distortioning the identity. But I see those elements there. The constitution of a subject, a multiple subject, and if it's done through a performance, and how this goes along with listening, with freedom as something that is constituted because the bird doesn't want to come out of the cage, of the open cage, is like, and this is something that I have tried to mention on my workshops of impro that are more like workshops of freedom rather than impro. But how much freedom can you give to someone if this person doesn't have freedom inside him or herself? Where is where is the freedom then? So yeah, it's a lot. That's why I was asking for help because I'm not formulating something beautiful and perfectly structured. Yeah, you're giving us the help with your statement. I think it's fantastic the way you're stating, and I think that the answer is right away because it's open, because it's free. And I have lived this by opening cages to birds, and those birds who don't want to come out at the beginning end up flying out. They do it. They embrace that freedom. So I believe that maybe your workshops open doors and help those who dare to fly. Not all of them do it, and not all of them do it right away. But with that metaphor of opening cages in real life, one of the things that I love the best is being a teacher. I always make the reference to my ex. Uh, well, I always talk about Franco Pellini, who was my student. And one of the things that I really loved is being a teacher, and I think it's a metaphor of opening doors. You don't you don't take the person, you don't motivate the person motivates him or herself. And that building, that construction, I think it's fundamental. It's fundamental that we can state that instance of freedom, respect towards the other, give him or her the chance to give them time. And also to look at ourselves like, yeah, we're super free, but are we really flying in the in the best way possible? I mean, this is a metaphor, but the idea of opening the door, of opening the limit. I mean, I love saying anecdotes, but for me, it was really important. You know, when you read a resume, I was working a lot in many laboratories, but I was in the radio of Colonia in Germany, and something peculiar was happening that Claude Schroeder, the one who built all these things about Helsing, at 5 p.m. we had a production meeting, and he was like, "Well, I'm from France, and I was given the keys of the best laboratory that was in the Bourges laboratory." And I was there. I had the chance, the privilege to be there along with Horacio Bayon, coming and going. We were doing different things, and it was a meeting of production. And he was like, "This is really not letting me be free," and I was like, "Oh my god, I want to go, I want to be free like this bird." But one thing that was fantastic is, tell me why this function of a producer, like, okay, let's go together and have lunch tomorrow. Okay, we want to have lunch the next day, and we were there enjoying a gush, a local a beer. And he said, "My function and that of all producers of BDR is to find people that are super interesting, bring those them here to produce something, and then being fostering them so that they don't do the first thing they did when we first invited them. That is moving them beyond their own limits." And it was like, "But that's a risk." And they were like, "Yeah, I mean, it doesn't need to be perfect. Some things are going to be bad or end up wrong. But we don't want them to become machines of models. We want to take the risk of changing the model." And that was fantastic for me. That was one of the best lessons in my life. Thanks a lot. I was wondering what was revolving around this question, uh, Anna, that you stated about hierarchy. It's, of course, something that relates to us. I would like to bring back, linking it with the question that was done about the method. And I wanted to remember, with that, I wanted to remember the very fortunate intervention of Wade when he was talking about that good tuning was a liberation. It allowed more flexibility. I mean, We can sit down here in many different ways. We are on a building of the 16th century, and of course it has been reconditioned, but and I think it's important. And as improvisers, we know that freedom is something we need to talk. And I'm going to go back to this word, to the words of Wade. Freedom is something paradoxical, and it can increase with the multiplication of limits. It's not that on one hand we have freedom, and on the other hand is all the bad guys who are imposing limits and are restricting liberty and freedom. I think that at least we should think about a dialectical relationship between these two elements. And the paradox is when we don't have a limit system as a good uh, temper, what is happening then stops moving. That is, the collective dimension increases as much as we follow the rules of the game. They need to be more singular. But as long as they are singular and more specific, the uh, social relationships diminish. I want to go back to something that was mentioned yesterday, an observation, and if someone has references in the corpus of improv, I would like to know the vision of improv in the long term, the long duration of historians throughout decades, and this fantastic piece of Gage that took 400 years to be deployed. Because there are some improvisations that are, and I won't say this in slow motion because that will be a vision that improv is something that happens in 20 minutes or a half an hour, which is a very limited vision of improv. We are improvising throughout our lives in a dance that I'm going to metaphorically describe in slow motion, but it's not slow because it's the time of a life. It's the time of an institution. It's the time of a group. And we can relate it with what Wade was saying. How can we foster the realm of critical studies? Well, they created a journal. Yeah, they created a postgraduate level, and we can laugh at that. But at the same time, it's a way of making something gain some importance socially. How? Well, there are many ways, there are many nuances to it. This institution, because I mean, there are many institutions here, but the institution that brought together and created a network, this is an institution without infrastructure. We have, yeah, we have a post graduation that are accredited by the Ministry of uh, Education, but we don't have infrastructure per se. I mean, we have the minimum structure needed according to the requirements of the Ministry of Education. We want to promote maybe someday post graduation in improvisation, just as Canadians did. If it's pertinent to us, not necessarily is going to happen, but it could be interesting. This is an institution without an infrastructure. So what we are seeing, the logo on the, I mean, I could laugh out at that like forever. But those were very small signals that we established maybe 20 years ago in order to make this institution absolutely made up could be believable. And we are now, uh, well, not competing, but we are at the level of institutions that have centuries. And of course, we can we can sit down in circles and hold hands and sing kumbaya. I'm not questioning, the table. I think that an institution without infrastructure like ours needs to do some gestures so that it can be consistent, that allows people to notice its tangibility, how tangible it is, and to make it circle in an institutional circuit where it's not usually there. I'm not talking about ours. Uh, What I'm trying to say is that, yeah, I know this is a country a little bit, well, maybe Colombia is a little bit more. We are a country of institutions. That's a tradition, and yeah, we can laugh at institutions if we want. It's absurd, it's ridiculous, but that's how we are made. That's how Mexico and part of Latin America is made. So going back to the correct, or to the good temper, in the course of a live impro, in its duration, even if it's long or short, what are the aspects that are at play? Not because one is more free than the other. I think it changes because the relationships are different. This is going to be, I mean, I'm not responding to the invitation that I'm sharing, but what I want to mention, and it was somehow a temptation. The point is understanding how a good standardization at certain point is an improvisation gesture, because those who are there, they allow the people who are watching online can see more clearly and can have access to what we are talking about. Yeah, you are like the teachers over there in the front of the school. We know that you are not, but I think it's understood how what we're talking about when we talk about the different layers and what's at play in improvisation. I would like to take this questioning to that area. Like, what are the tools? Because I'm not giving an answer. It's more of a question. How are we going to build the field of impro in Spanish? What kind of institutional gestures are we going to change in order to gain a strengthening to the field? It's more complex than just choosing between freedom and non-freedom, because restrictions are always in both sides. Indeed, I think something that's really interesting, and of course, that's how it is, the performative gestures that are present in our decision making. I think it's there, and of course, yeah, you have a curtain or certain kind of light. These are gestures that convey certain communication, certain ways of relating when it comes to music or a scenario, and you can move that to different places in the world. How do we get together in a coffee shop? And it has to do with the construction of institutions that is linked to the elements, the semiotic elements, such as the logo that is present on a T-shirt. I don't know, whatever. Um, it's there, and that's why it's an open question. Is it there where the whole thing resides? I mean, we know it's not, but then we can continue questioning, how do we subvert? And subvert is not necessarily sitting on the in a circle. It's imagining other ways. It's being aware of those gestures that are biased, that are historical biases of the academic and this type of conversations. So yeah, there are many interrogations And it's relevant to have this interrogation, this conversation, because it places us in a different state. And in this case, we have a space, a facility that provides certain possibilities but closes other possibilities. So when we were watching yesterday and listening Sentire, I was in the first row and I was thinking a lot on, okay, I'm in the first line and this vibration is reaching me at its fullest. I have a total access to this vibration, and I can say, go out and say, this is amazing. But maybe the person who was behind me and saw just half of it, yeah, this is not a criticism. It's more like thinking on how these things happen in the space in a time and how well you were talking about these matters that happen during improvisation or other fields. It's related to this corporality, this performativity of the bodies in the space. That, as a first point, could be interesting. Franco, I'm sorry. I want to, well, not respond, but continue the dialogue with Benjamin. But Benjamin stated, when I talk about limits, I'm not talking about just breaking limits. It's maybe moving them further away, and that means stating other limits and other rules of the game. I think that's fundamental. And also, if we say that subjectivity is built collectively, depending on what we find in our environment, when the system of key well tempered, it was a revolution at its moment. And those revolutions were linked to changes, moving the boundaries to each of the social systems, political, economical, of their own moments in time. It could be successful, more successful, or less successful, but the idea is to take previous systems and how can we revitalize. And for me, this is an election because you can choose something different. I I have no doubt that we can work, that we can experiment, and it's experimental music for that reason. We are moving the limits. We're pushing the limits. Limits are there. It's not that the limits are not there and then we are going out to the nothingness. It's building collective ways when we play with improvisers that are free improv in anywhere in the world. We sit down and we start a dialogue because there is a lot of common codes that exist. It's good that you bring attention towards that. We don't go out to the void, and that's quite relevant to keep in mind. I wanted to add something because there is a word that Benjamin uses that is gesture. If we There's a beautiful of Marie Bardet making gestures, and she was talking about the gestures of agriculture and how they permeated institutions and of course their politics and policies. So when we talk about these things, we always want to change and define, and we talk about institutions, which is what we are doing now, like moving the personal limits. But I think right now the point is revise, renovate mm, in the institutions, the bodies, and that's where impro emerges and we can move the boundaries. So we need to check those gestures while we are playing. And and yes, there are gestures, but they can be super powerful, and from there we can start working to renovate the practices, institutional practices and political practices we are part of. Thank you. Well, first of all, it's fascinating because it places us in a place of tension, fortunately. Like, yeah, happily. Otherwise, it will be super boring. And yeah, I said it before, and I will say it again. I get bored very easily. It's like, oh my god, this is so boring. Like there needs to be a friction. And I think what's interesting is the possibility of building this device of dialogue, this possibility of dialogue, and it's in friction where something will emerge, will definitely emerge. So I celebrate whenever there's friction. I think it's fantastic, and I'm super happy that we can have that we can have the possibility of having a conversation in a passionate, lively, reflexive way. I think this is a condition that we need in order to create something new. On that regard, I will also, oh, by the way, that book of Marie Bardet is amazing. She makes a description, a beautiful description, and I take your hand to continue that thread. It's the gesture. The gesture is not like a cut of an axe because she's talking about agriculture. I don't remember the whole thing, but yeah, it's agriculture. So what Marie Bardet is saying is the gesture is not the axe falling. It's not the result of the axe falling. The gesture has to do with an impulse that comes from the necessity or from the urgency, from a vital urgency, which is what determines how things are done until the final point of the gesture is how the axe falls in the log. So this is a gesture. It's a whole thing. It's a whole process, and I think it's important to place it here. And what is happening here is that collectively we are building uh, and creating the possibility of creating more gestures. And maybe this gesture is not going to reach the log I wanted, but or it will. But in this exercise is where different powers of the of vitality, the powers of life, and maybe to wrap up this idea. Soili Roinick, I admire her. Soili Roinick, it's like a contagion. She says very interesting things regarding subjectivity and this idea of subjectifying something. The revolution. A revolution is not just this gesture for appropriation of the means of production. She says we need to appropriate ways of reproduction, and from there other changes will arise, will emerge, and they, of course, will have an effect on the collective. And that's beautiful because at the end of the exercise, there's a lot of people here. We're appropriating ways of production and reappropriating uh, ways like this one. So the multiplicity is big, and we can share our thoughts, we can share our ways, and by sharing our thoughts, we are no longer in the same place, even if it's a small gradient of movement. But if we look into the future, one gradient can move us into a completely different place. So that will be the hope. I don't have to move 180 degrees in a single moment, like the spectacular change that we are all expecting. No, well, spectacular, in this world, like with all that's going on, most probably the spectacular movement is not going to happen. But it's super interesting that we move gradient by gradient, inch by inch, and at the same time keeping this conversation alive. Indeed, indeed, I believe that something, well, a couple of things. I always think in this case about the fracture. That's the word that comes to my mind. Or I don't know if fracture is too radical compared to the door that is open. But yeah, it's like something is starting to change. Like maybe in the cities, this crack from where something new start to emerge, like plants that emerge through the concrete, through a crack, and it's not probable. It's something almost impossible, and yet they find the way to emerge. And on the other hand, the notion of, and I go back to Alain when he was saying there's energy. A is for energy, but A is also the A for chaos. And this is a very complex, there are so many complex things at play that are always related to improv, all the things that we can do within certain agreements, certain codes of behavior. Sometimes these codes are more rigid or less rigid, but they are present. This notion of an individual sort of governance, and at the same time a shared governance to play with the limits of these boundaries. How can you move the limit of another one? How can you inspire someone else to move away from a certain space, or to move away from a community or the paradigm that was never questioned? So there are many things here at play. The idea of moving away from the paradigm, and maybe moving through sparks for future conversation. When I started writing the book, I never knew it could spark the conversation of electroacoustic and its following development. Caro, reading stories of electroacoustic, I find out that there's barely any women present on that area, and I start to wonder if this because there was no access for women, so that's why they are not present on this history, or is it because this was written by ignoring women? And when Iverson wrote the history of the laboratory in Colonia, there were no women, and that's it. That was the comment. There were no women. And in other circumstances, we have Peng Noi. I do remember what's the name of the author, and she was mentioning Terry Rogers. She comments that one of the problems is that when we talk about women on that history, it's always we always choose those who are absolutely genius, and the idea that the presence of women in these stories could help to open doors to young women who want to do something. It's like, okay, there you are, and over there, all above you, unreachable, is the amazing women who did something incredibly amazing. And then they ask another man, like, where are the women in electroacoustics? And they send a picture of a line, maybe 200 girls of 16-year-old girls welding the synthesizers in a place in Singapore that then men are going to be using to play their music. So for me, besides the fact of how the tragic irony of this happening, that the shock for me was we have a system of fabrication of synthesizers in a context of oppression, in a context of the capital logic, and another system where people who are playing music and making music are always speaking about freedom and all. So my question is, it has a double face. Is necessary to have this distinction, this division, so that we can move forward. And the other is, how do we apply to what you were mentioning? If we are going to, if we're going to have a building, a meta color or post color with this prefix, like post something, post university, it is necessary. Is it recommended? Is it best to avoid it? Or, I mean, I'm referring to what we've seen in physics that apparently it doesn't exist, but at certain scale, universe behaves somehow, and whether the scale is bigger or smaller, apparently it behaves differently. So, are we going to have an institution, if you want to call it? We're going to have an institution that is going to be studied, or that is going to study impro without really knowing too much about it, without not without having a clear idea, or they're going to teach analysis of improvisation. I don't know if practice per se. The statement that we are managing, that the improvisers are using when we are improv, to which point, to what extent it's necessary that the institutions are there. How are we going to constitute a mediation that might distort or not? I mean, this is like in the back of my mind. I'm just trying to put this into words. Right now, I don't even have an opinion. I'm just curious. Wade just hands me the microphone, like, there you go. I think this is a core question. What's an institution for improvisation? And there's no sense. I mean, at least I myself, improv doesn't necessarily have to be an object of study. And actually, in previous days, I said the contrary. We had a panel, an amazing panel with a psychoanalyst and two musicians, and it was surprising listening to them in complete parody, not improv per se, but um, like, how is it for you, and how is it for me, and what do you think about this, and what do you think about that? That conversation is only possible if improvisation is recognized as a statute, or is considered as valuable as the rest of the knowledges that are at play. And what happens is, what an analyst, what an artist, what an improviser is doing is very similar, with certain nuances, but it's very similar. And the point is, what is an institution for improvisation? And I'm not talking about here, or the institution per se. Like, I mean the network. I am thinking about all the work you've done in Colombia, all the work that is being done in other places. And I think this is the big question that brings us together. Yes, of course, like, to what extent the institutions are pulling certain strings. This is I mean, what we might be afraid of, like the strings that are at play, and how can we collaborate in improvisation in a more organic way without being completely institutionalized, but at the same time knowing that there's a contradiction, like it needs some institution, but at the same time we don't want to be devoured by the institution. I mean, yeah, but we've been talking about this. The concern, and therefore the proposal that Benjamin is doing is great, because it's giving a particular status to validate, to socially validate and to project. It's like the panel that we're going to have on Saturday to think more deeply about this. But we need to be open to listen, to understand that this statement doesn't repeat the idea of freezing uh, that is sometimes generated within the scholar world. So the statement that we are trying to put at play is how can we do it among all of us in dialogue and at the same time finding a way. It's a big challenge. Yeah, I was remembering something that Tito mentioned yesterday, like the idea of patrimony. And in the studies of patrimony, it happens a lot. And in the intangible patrimony, like, okay, I have these practices, I have this ways of doing, I have this culture or cultures or traditions. And when it comes to build a museum to legitimate this patrimony, you are given a declaration of patrimony of humanity or whatever. And at the same time, we might wonder, like, what's the danger? What's the good thing? What could be dangerous in the face of such situation? And yes, on one hand, it helps to place or to give some specific attention or some validation to a practice, which was the point to preserve a practice and to bring it along with the culture that is also alive. That's why I think it comes along with culture, impro, music, and it makes us wonder, like, what the risk of preserving, but maybe by preserving it, I am also preserving the institution. I am also preserving the paradigm. So I think there is a very precise parallelism between these two things. Well, there are the Japanese that declared the maximum maestro of flute, Yakohashi, as the patrimony. I think they have jumped right into the situation of not paralyzing the evolution of this person. We're going to declare improvisation a patrimony. Okay, Tito, he might be listening to us because he has the radio on. He's listening to the football soccer team, but well, he's working. Um, well, he mentioned all of this, and I wanted to mention what Tito said about patrimony, making improvisation a patrimony, or making the results of improvisation a patrimony. And he read something related to this in previous days because it's a double spiral. Right now, we're in like the second stage of this event. I wish we could share, Ricardo, that text that we could publish it because it explores how an archive is improvisational by itself. And I think that Ali might think something similar as a historian. Um, there is a reflection, some reflections that are published that are important not just because of the patrimony of other institutions, but because, for instance, the portal that we are building, that we're about to launch, it also has the possibility of behaving like an archive. And we need to know, we need to find a way of facing our own institutionality. We need to understand how the gesture of institutionalizing uh, is it's like becoming a governor. How are we going to lead in improvisation and how the archive could be understood as an improvisation in its own nature, in fast forward or in slow motion. And at the same time, how can we move forward without losing the spirit, the original spirit at the beginning? Indeed, because then you go like, oh yeah, we cannot have an archive. Let's just burn the whole thing. So we have to find that like a solution, so to speak, to this tension, to make different readings to this tension. Because when we talk about archive, there's a lot of logic on how you base an archive, how you deal with it, how you preserve it, how you construct it. So it's like, how can we make an archive be more anarchist, so or more anarchic? So going back to, we need to find a way, because otherwise, I mean, it's a challenge to find a middle point, if there's such thing. Creating a memory of what is happening, so a memory that can be checked from the future or for the future. And it's a question. It's more like of an interrogation, not exactly a question, because it doesn't have a specific answer. Like, what are the guidelines of the creation of this archive? Because every time we create something by leaving something else out. So this is something that we need to consider. And at some point, I was talking to someone some time ago. It was a guy who was in charge of publications like comics and all. He's also a musician. Well, he was a musician, but he was no longer playing instruments. And he was like, "Oh yeah, improv and comics and all." And that's how I entered. And he was like, "You know what? Something free must become rigid, because otherwise you cannot play some limits, because it needs to be uh, especially. But what if we do improv without listening? You know, like it makes you wonder, is that possible? Is that okay? To institutionalize is placing some seeds, and among many of those who are here, we agree that listening is fundamental. It's it's the basis of the creation of a space where there's going to be conflict, because that's how it is. Whenever there's people, there's conflict. So how can we build something without wanting to destroy it later on, just because we're disagreeing? You know. I would like to recommend an author that's called Enar Riviere. Well, Riviere, it's French, but well, she's from Madrid, and she wrote very recently a text in the journal of Museo del Prado, the archives of artists. I think you share that text, but not with everyone. Yeah, just with a select group of privileged people. I share that text. No, but it was the idea of archive could be not an institutional product. Working with Petre Cobalt in 1984 or so, we had a tour, and she was talking to me about the idea of improv with an autarkic listening. That is, that non-listening, and what that produced. We didn't talk a lot about it, because it was one of those people that we shouldn't talk too much about practice, because that will not be, I mean, taking practice and understanding it through logos was not that good, so we didn't have a big conversation. But uh, I just want to add something. The article of Ricardo, and he's talking about archives, active archives. An active archive is an archive that is creating material, or the creation of material that is supposed to be within that archive. And it's not a matter of just of publicity. We will work on that logic with a traveler. It's called Viajero Móvil Experimental, like experimental traveler. And that became a space to avoid the works of the contemporary people. And many of the people here have worked, and we started to make this archive as a sort of documentation. We knew it was going to be experimental, that's why it was called experimental. But then the pandemic came, so this a traveler that it was moving around, and now we have more than 110 editions, and it's an archive well that led us to the reflection of how in we how that archive was built, and the categorization is like was that it was a live archive because he calls his friends like, "Hey, guys!" And for me, it's amazing when I am called by Wade and Santiago. They called me and they tell me, "Hey, we want to publish this work that we did on improv in Colombia," and for us, it was fantastic. So the archive started to uh, have a function that was not so clear for us at the beginning, and now it's going to feed itself. It's like an open space to replicate this somewhere else. So along with them, then with Benjamin, to have this with the archives with 17 Institute. Oh, thanks for the conversation. I'm just gonna take 1 minute. I would like to highlight other possibilities. Well, not possibilities, like other blind spots when it comes to institutionalization of improvisation, like how much it can strengthen binarism. When we studied improv, where do we draw the line? I think that what happens with institutions, our study will end here, and that means that we're going to have to leave many things outside, and maybe an artist or someone might have some or I mean, I don't know, it's human behavior. We enter an institution to study improv in the conventional imagination. It's paradoxical. And another thing, another blind spot or deaf spot is the generation of canon. That is that it occurs even without the will of doing so. Now that I arrived in Mexico City, I was checking my social networks. The amount of improv concerts is like too much. There's like 3 concerts every day. It's a lot. And these people is not here with us talking. So the generation of canon with music that are done collectively and with experimental connections, it's a contradiction per se, and we are doing it all the time. So the criteria of selecting people is okay, those who are in front of the classroom, there's no way of making a conciliation between these two things. So the idea of institutions that are going to generate these canons with which the canons that we use to do what we do. I just wanted to speak for students of the institute, and I gave this. beautiful metaphor of the cage with an open door. I think that this colloquium, for me as a student, has been that's like being in a cage and someone opened the door, and now I have the possibility of getting along with some questions that I could not see from some other place. So yeah, there is this thing of okay, institution because there needs to be a framework, there needs to be some device, but rather than just going out from the cage, I see the door as a window. Like I don't want to cross the threshold for whatever reason, at least not yet. I I don't see a door. I see more like a window. I can listen, I can learn, and maybe eventually I will do something with all of that. So maybe this colloquium, this space, made me go out of my country to come here and listen and hear the improv and improvise myself in what is happening here. I understand that it's not a finished product. It's more like ideas that are resonating, and I like it. I think that really moves us, and also as a student, it gives me a sense of belonging, even a motivation, because all this too academic speech, I've been there for a long time. So for me, the institute has opened rather than a door, a window to let me see a different landscape. And having this type of subject, this type of topic, uh, from the ignorance, I say this is amazing. Thank you. Just a couple of comments on what Benjamin was saying about the text. Yeah, the reference to Riviere is fundamental. I would not have been able to write this without this reference. The active archive is actually a term of Ulises Carrion that is linked to the tradition of art mail. And I think there is a very interesting link to explore because it's understanding this kind of art is understanding the creation of networks. Now, I think and it's important to express the kind of institute that is a 17 Institute, its nature. I think there lies the key of how are we going to talk about improvisation. I mean, we're now talking about studies of improv because, yeah, it's an imprecise title because at the end, the idea is not studying improvisation, but thinking from the logic of improv. It's questioning from improvisational perspective different areas, which implies thinking in terms of processes. So, Christine, this is never going to be a finished product. That's exactly the point of the area to be a continuous process. And regarding what you were saying, yeah, it's an area like sort of a never ending area because it crosses all the areas of life. But the fact that it doesn't cover or that we cannot cover it completely means that it's necessary. I mean, it's sort of like the possibility impossibility. What I was quoting at the beginning of the colloquium, we talk about impro, which is something impossible that needs to be defended. And I think that the same thing needs to be done from the institute. Now, 17 Institute is not a university per se. It's not related to knowledge in positive terms, related to knowledge in negative terms, and what it means if it questions how the knowledge or academic knowledge was built. It's questioning from the margins, from the somehow from the debris that cannot be completely captured from the outside. We are in a paradoxical area that in an area of tension. I don't like the word contradictory. I'm not a fan, although it's a word that could we could use. And also, there's a possibility of movement all the time. No, very quickly, I wanted to say that the institution already exists. We are the institution in terms, in anthropological terms, not as an entity, but as a network of affections and perceptions. Every time we get together, it's very common, like, finally we meet, because we knew one another previously, because we were part of a network that extended throughout the world. And that's part of an institution. That's what an institution means. It can be present in different moments, in different places. Um, but the institution as a collective, as a network, it, 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 it exists. It's there. It's basically that we need to catch up more often. And I am more on the line of petrocobalt, like sound more, less speech. Well, as you may notice, I the silence is important, so I was in silence for a long time during this panel. I mean, besides having a bad written word or bad handwriting, let me tell you is that I am the soul of every party. Not because I'm particularly cool, which I am, by the way, but that's another story. Um, I have a sweet, uh, sometimes because I have a Swiss razor, and that makes me an important person during parties because there's always like, oh, we cannot open the wine, so my Swiss razor is suddenly the star of the show. Uh, it makes me feel like a hero, this hero, American hero called MacGyver or MacGyver, uh, and it's an institution. He is an institution. Why? Because he's the sort of like a manager. Why a manager? Because my Swiss racer is I mean, it occurs or it's present in other places. What does it have to do with archive and document? Well, as I said in my text, I'm not interested in sharing my experiences on a text to share. It's more like a collective sharing of experience, and the manager allows us to share those experiences and a big trajectory that happens since a long time ago. Actually, one of the books that's outside it exists in Guelph. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist everywhere, and unfortunately, not everyone was able to come because unfortunately we're Latin Americans, and one of the problems that we have and that you may notice is that we are constantly fighting for the microphone. And so touching, improvising in a circular way as it is done in Guelph in a house, like a like an improv jam. In the middle, you're listening to an improv orchestra, so it's a big concert in within the house. So there's also that road. When I went for the first time to Guelph a long time ago, and we were talking about improv, I didn't know there existed after Bravo River everything we could do in our country. We were a weird presence when we went there to speak and play and to propose to make the translation of falling in the wrong note. It's good to have the possibilities that the institution, and I think that in Guelph we have that experience, that the institutions can be the managers, those who bring together, those who organize. But the problem is when institutions believe they are the Swiss razor, when they think that without them, then we cannot get together. So the insistence is, the problem. That's why I believe it's relevant to share experiences, to share our experiences, our relationship with people, and that internet is not helping us because the relationship needs to be face to face. Otherwise, you're just facing a screen. And maybe you find someone who loves the microphone, and then you find someone who loves silence as well as an improvisation. So I think it's a language, a shared language. I was talking about anarchism before, and I think it's a little bit of it. My voice is the voice of the collectivity, and thanks to the voice of the collective, my voice is also present. That dialogue that occurs when we are playing, and it doesn't matter if you are Fabrizio or Igor or Pedro or Quetzalcoatl. It doesn't matter your culture or who you are. It's more like Dolphy was mentioning. Once you are playing, uh, one the note that was played, it's gone. You cannot take it back. So bringing back those notes, those words to spark something similar, but in other people that are going to be questioned. That's my aim, to provoke. That's why we are here, to spark, to seduce, to call out. Thank you. I think those were really good closing words to turn everything around. I just want to say something small before closing. Um, Talking about Donna Haraway, it's important the world that we use to create other worlds, the ideas that we use to create other ideas. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for this presentation, for this panel. I'm happy and I hope that you are happy too. And I hope it can spark different ideas here and outside this place. Thank you.